It's my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker in this last session of the day. That is Dr. Sussan Babaie, who teaches Iranian art at the Courtauld Institute of Art, Britain's premier art historical institution, and she is therefore a very welcome first foot in the door. 27 people dealing with the art of Western Europe and one person dealing with the art of Iran. So she specializes in the Safavid period, and she has made Isfahan her very own city. I'll say no more. Off you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this conference, John, and IHF team. As Robert noted, Esfahan has become my city, and Robert has something to do with it, as he does with all kinds of things that we get involved in art history and architectural history. In his opening paragraph of the chapter in Volume 6 of the Cambridge History of Iran, entitled Safavid Architecture, Robert Hillenbrand writes, and I quote, "Safavid buildings are preserved in greater abundance than those of any other period in Iran." Let me see if I can get this moving. Yeah. Yet Safavid architecture is far more imperfectly known than that of the Seljuks, Ilkhanids, or Timurids. End of quote. He continues to suggest prejudice among several factors contributing to this paradox with the following statement, and again I quote, "The finest Safavid buildings lend themselves to uncritical panegyric and readily enter the unlovely category of tourist attractions. And perhaps for that very reason, many of them have not been subjected to detailed scholarly analysis." End of quote. He adds other factors, such as dearth of documentation and overexposure of a few famous buildings in Esfahan, which I did not listen to. The effects of Robert's observations on a graduate student just setting off to choose a topic for a doctoral dissertation was profound, and I have since been chasing the subject of Safavid architecture. Here I want to say a couple of words as well, which is to acknowledge the debt of gratitude not only to all those who had studied the history of architecture of Esfahan, and above all, to the Ismeo team that worked in Esfahan, and especially Eugenio Galdieri, the late Eugenio Galdieri, who provided me access with all the archives in Rome. My topic, Esfahan Architourism and Historic Preservation, takes a totally different approach to the notion of preservation. In fact, I'm not at all involved in the sort of policy making and bureaucratic or top-down approaches to how to create better preservation models for the monuments. Rather, I'm a historian of architecture, and I'm interested in the way in which those unlovely category of tourist attractions may have some implications for the way we come to see, to experience, and to protect the monuments in Esfahan, and I'm focusing my attention on Esfahan. That unlovely category of tourist attractions of the mid-1980s, when Hillenbrand was writing, and the mid-1990s, when I entered the scene, are indeed a far, far cry from our current times. And here I attract your attention to Liz Taylor among various celebrities who took a tour of Esfahan. When Esfahan, its Safavid monuments, along with Persepolis, have made their way onto the list of 1,000 places to see before you die, a 2003 travel book that was reprinted in 2011, and not to mention all the tourist-rated sites and hotels on such tourism web outlets as the TripAdvisor and the like. Perhaps not surprisingly, it was, and it is, Safavid monuments of Esfahan that remain by far the most frequently reproduced images on the covers of guidebooks, which I did just a survey of very quickly. And while covers of the English language editions are nearly universally graced with Esfahan, this is also quite dominant in French and German guidebooks to Iran as well. A more ecumenical approach is taken by our own ICHTO, سازمان میراث فرهنگی و گردشگری, which used to be called سازمان میراث فرهنگی or سازمان میراث فرهنگی کشور, and the addition of گردشگری to its mandate itself a very telling aspect of what this has meant in terms of the monument's reception across the globe, and especially tourism, both internal and external. And this ecumenical approach includes all kinds of heritage issues, not just monuments, but also religious sites or religious practices, peoples of Iran, crafts of Iran, foods of Iran, nature in Iran, and so on and so forth. So what does it all mean with regard to historic preservation, and perhaps more significantly, the knowledge base? I'm interested in the knowledge base about the history of the monuments of Esfahan that would inform and support the strategies for preservation and reuse. And in fact, I might just plug it in right here to Vahid Alaqband that I have one proposal at least at the end of this. I'm just giving you a heads up. So some of it has been quite significant, and I think speakers before me especially, unfortunately, not as much given to the medieval period or early modern period of the history of Islamic Iran, but nonetheless, just before tea break, you heard quite a lot about Esfahan, and I'm grateful for all that preamble. But for instance, important steps have been taken, such as blocking the rise of that monstrosity, Jahannama, or banning car traffic from the Maidan as steps towards, very positive steps towards reducing effects of pollution, vibration of traffic, and so forth on the Maidan, for instance. But there are also what I think some unfortunate steps as well. I happened to start doing my dissertation research, going to Iran for that, just after the one and only standing gateway from the Chahar Bagh to one of the palaces of the Dolat Khane, and that happened to be that of Hasht Behisht, to have been taken down. And now, in fact, in the rehabilitation of the Chahar Bagh, there are new gateways, and the one on the upper right-hand side, you can almost see in the background the profile of Hasht Behisht, where a kind of a regularization of the peripheries of the Chahar Bagh are taking place to perhaps evoke something of the historical conditions of the Chahar Bagh with an urgency that is quite remarkable, as it were. Now, given the fact that tourism is a fact of life at the moment, and that it has become one of the most important sources of income for many economies, we all know that Egypt's economic downfall after the Tahrir uprisings of 2011 was directly linked with the drastic drop in tourism. So given that so many economies, cultural heritage industry, depend on this issue, one could call it, if I may call it, a cultural heritage industry that faces increasingly difficult challenges, which is somewhere in the vicinity of balancing, very tactful, difficult task of balancing preservation of historic monuments and their integrity in the face of economic demands. It is this last point, a historical integrity issue of monuments, that animates my thinking in this talk, and it is in that spirit that I have turned to what appears to be its antithesis, that is the concept of architourism. The term and its associated concepts were coined for a conference and exhibition that took place in 2002 at Columbia University in New York, and was followed by a catalog, a very interesting catalog. As a concept, it encapsulates the recent phenomena of mass appeal of single monument tourism. I think the Taj Mahal tops it all, with all kinds of celebrities at the site and the image taken, lifted, and put on all kinds of unsavory objects and sites. The single, or the appeal, mass appeal of a single monument tourism may yet to be irrelevant to any single city or monument in Iran. It does nevertheless point to a particularly vexing problem at the intersection of tourist economy and historic preservation of built environments. So I take here Esfahan, the most popular destination not only for foreign visitors to Iran, but also for internal tourism, as the site to test the effects of that mass appeal on the way in which the city's historic monuments are being accessorized, if I may use that term. And given the time constraints, I want to confine my comments to a very few salient aspects of what architourism might indicate from the point of view of the consumer, the tourist, whose purchasing powers tend to dictate decisions about how to refashion an architectural experience. And what I'm suggesting is that as high-minded as our goals may be, we cannot ignore that very important, compelling source of economic power and a very major force of movement of people across the globe. These have profound implications in terms of historic preservation or new strategies for reorganizing access, visibility, or refashioning of monuments. And I want to focus much of my attention later on a single monument. So the overriding appeal of a single monument's celebrity status is in large part sustainable only if several experiential criteria were to be met. I don't know if you can locate the man on the flying carpet there. This was a diorama, believe it or not. I saw it with my own eyes. This is my photograph. At the Natural History Museum in New York University, a magnificent institution of learning that at some point in its history thought a diorama of the Maidan of Esfahan with a flying carpet would indeed teach something. So this is the exotic, as perceived cumulatively in the collective memory of Europeans and later Americans, who remain the principal consumers, still the principal consumers of the exotics of Iran and Esfahan, as very many other places. We are yet to see droves of Chinese tourists who are, for the moment, not even picking London as their prime destination, but go for Paris and Florence for now. What I'm suggesting, in other words, there is a history to the attraction of the city, and that tourism is not just the construction of contemporary mass movements. The other criteria for this architourism to be particularly appealing has, thank you. That would be terrible if I just go down. I'll have 2 requests then. The other criteria is the spectacular. The thing has to be truly spectacular. And I think here, the Maidan and its constituent parts never fail to impress, to truly bring out awe in the viewer, but certainly photography makes a huge difference in the way the material is sold. The richness and variety of things to buy and expressions of cosmopolitanism of Esfahan have always been on display ever since its inception at the very end of the 16th century. All of those marketplace events and events of daily markets at the Maidan were vividly described by Europeans in their chronicles since that very beginning of their coming to the court of Shah Abbas and later on. And they remain one of the principal aspects of that exotic appeal for architourism, with a little bit of a retail therapy thrown in. The exotic may also be a signal of alterity, but operates most effectively because of its comforting confirmation of familiar otherness. It's very complicated, but what the point is that the local habits of sociability, which amazed travelers in the 17th century, continue to hold their appeal for new tourists in town. Safavid Esfahan, its buildings articulated social life through purpose-built architecture of leisure. This was quite novel, even in Europe of early modern period. The cafe culture of Esfahan grew around the Maidan and along the Bazaar route. This too has been commented on repeatedly by Europeans who visit Esfahan, or Istanbul for that matter, where exactly similar kinds of sociable activities were present. The architectural and social life of these monuments as spaces of leisure, and indeed an aspect of the democratization of leisure, which was so central to an understanding of the urban conception in the Safavid period, Esfahan, seems to still have that kind of an appeal. And here I'm making an appeal. I don't know who listens to it, but the removal of such places of sociability in the city is actually stripping it of some of that texture of life then and life now. And the construction of public sites of leisure and their accessibility actually extended as well to the Khiyaban Chahar Bagh, which I briefly showed before, where the urbanites could escape to for strolls, and still perhaps can do so, although my memory of it does not confirm it any longer, but also the riverfront, views of which and the entertainment that was provided over the river were seen from the bridges, primarily by the denizens of Esfahan in the 17th century in particular. The effects of ecological changes and motivated decisions that threaten the complete destruction not only of the building's very reason. I'm concerned with not just the sterile fabric of the building, but its very reason for being there in the first place, and the experiential context of its architectural particularities is alarming indeed. The Khajoub Bridge and the Allah Verdi Khan Bridge are spectacular engineering feats, each of them deserving a different dissertation, perhaps many of them. But above all, they are among the most beautiful bridges in the world precisely because they span the Zayande River, a dry river that has turned them into fish out of water, literally dead architecture. The cafes, the promenades, market stalls, gardens, and bridges, these were integral to the urban life of Esfahan, and they were integral to the urban planning of Esfahan. All of it, around the Maidan and the Chahar Bagh, were begun by order of Shah Abbas at the end of the 16th century and built and developed over the course of the 17th century. Just a note, by the way, Ali Ghapu is not a Timurid building. It is a Safavid building. So these were integral to the life or the urban life of Esfahan until recently, and they were understood to be integral to the maintenance of an authentic, whatever that meaning of authentic may be, or at least as close to authentic experience as can be had in a modern living city, a really tall order. In other words, the clearing of such functions from urban spaces, closing of what used to be a cafe in 17th century, closing of bridges to strollers, closing of roads, closing of buildings where you could have a view of things from. While all of those are perhaps neat and clean, they tend to strip away the nuanced layers of functional and social meanings the building held and have continued to hold. I'm actually opting for use of the buildings, but with great deal of care, of course. The point to be understood, in my view, is the potentialities for historic preservation of careful repurposing of buildings and their sites in view of their historical lives. Persepolis ceased to live long ago. But Esfahan remains a vibrant city, like Aleppo was before its destruction, and like Florence remains. The question so difficult to tackle seems to reside somewhere in the balance between sanitized and hermetically sealed historic monuments, the way the bureaucratic classes might think of it, and their location in their more or less still functioning urban environments. And this particularly may be a good moment to turn to the I can't pronounce it, I just put it together. Museumification, it's like mummification, but for a museum, of the Chehel Sotoun as a close-up example. I've worked on Esfahan's Maidan, the Dolat Khane, and especially the palaces. Until a decade ago, I could enter the building from that door on the left-hand side. Indeed, you would come from this street on the northern side of the Chehel Sotoun Gardens. This would be all of the Dolat Khane of Esfahan, the Chahar Bagh going over Allah Verdi Khan Bridge, the Maidan here and its attendant buildings. But we could arrive from this door from the side of the Chehel Sotoun, and the first thing you saw was the side of the building. And of course, you didn't go there. There was a little chaykhane to the left. That's where you stopped first. This site, the Chehel Sotoun, was the largest, most important of the ceremonial palaces, completed in the middle of the 17th century and continuously used for coronations, for Nowruz receptions, for audiences granted to foreign dignitaries, to depose rulers, and so on and so forth. In other words, one of the most important buildings of the ceremonial zones of the palace precinct of Esfahan. And in its own time, in other words, in the 17th century, you wouldn't enter from that side door, but you would have entered through the Maidan after much waiting at the Ali Rapu, which served not only as a palace, but also as a gateway, as the seat for the judiciary, for special guards, and so forth. But you would enter the building from here, go through an alleyway, enclosed alleyway, lined up with horses decked out and pages along with them. You would make a right turn through another alleyway and then come out just in front of the Chehel Sotoun gardens and the palace. To the right was located what was the Daftarkhane, or the chancellery. This ceremonial entrance, ceremonial approach, was very carefully constructed to actually lead you through these very ceremonially enhanced passageways. And as I noted, before the talar was added to the Ali Rapu here, you will have at least a view of what was then also another reception talar, talar Tabile, and then Tohid Khane on the right. You would not have access to any of that if you were an ambassador, but rather would be taken all the way to the entrance into the palace precinct, now completely opened up, as you can see here, and this funny creature here belongs to the Talar Teimuri, now a museum of natural history, not a museum, well, maybe taxidermies and bones and things of that sort. And a very important thing, by the way, I'm not downplaying it, but this recreates, in other words, what would have been the experience of coming into the Chehel Sotoun Palace precinct and walking along its pool, slowly coming to the talar, where musicians and servants, food, feasting, the Shah, his entourage, curtains, beautiful clothes, sounds and smells and talking and events were taking place. So it's that kind of an effort in recovering a kind of an authentic, if you will, approach at least to this building. Historic preservation faces not only dilemmas posed by the mass mobility and economic power of tourism, and especially this phenomena of architourism. This building isn't on everyone's list, but Esfahan is nowadays. But also it seems to be a relatively newcomer on the scene, that is, comparing it with the interconnected emergence of the practices both of tourism and art and architectural history. So what I'm suggesting, this preservation urge actually ignores the interconnected nature of tourism and the discipline of art and architectural history. It may be new or as yet to be introduced in the Iranian academic learning as a discipline, and here's my plea. The discipline of art and architectural history was born in the 19th century exactly at the same time as mass tourism begins to emerge. This shared background of the two ventures, tourism and architectural history, continues to inform cross-references and reflections, and the rearrangement of the approach to the Chehel Sotoun seems to me to be somewhat fitting into just such a mutual dependency, that is, contextualizing the site in historical terms. The site in this case has been, at least in part, narrativized for the consumption of a seemingly authentic historicism. Let me then finish by suggesting that the idea of historical authenticity, so fundamental to the strategies of preservation, as Professor Hillenbrand so compellingly discussed last night, is in itself capable of wreaking havoc if detached from the lived experience of the monumental sites. Its limits and its significance and knowledge based on the close readings of the buildings and all that relates to them, their context, their historical context, is the most urgent matter, in my view, as one who observes what these meanings have meant and continue to mean. And the unfortunate thing in Iran nowadays is that those who think they are doing architectural history or art history are now really bound by trying to reinvent Esfahan, among other places, through Derrida and Bourdieu. And Timur Samarkand may be lost for good, but Esfahan can be rescued, in my view. There is a reason, I think, and I have a little show and tell. There's a reason, really, why no building from Esfahan, as far as I know. If anyone knows of it, I usually get souvenirs of this kind from everywhere. But no single building from Esfahan has been made into the kinds of souvenirs that Robert showed one of them last night. The single building. I happen to have it, Robert, too, from the same shop, probably. That means that these are completely and tightly interwoven buildings into an urban fabric. They are part and parcel of a grand design, an urban design, and they demand to be experienced by the citizens, even the tourists, God forbid, as the embodiment of the idea of the Safavid city then, of Esfahan of today, and all along throughout its history. Thank you.